I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today I have two guests with me. They both look alike. Not look alike, but they're dressed alike, so you know they're together. And what we have sitting right next to me is Archbishop Richard Gundry, Emeritus, from the Independent Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch. And sitting next to him is Bishop Daniel Dengaran, who is the Bishop of the Diocese of the Southwest for the Church. And we'll talk a little bit about how they got here in a moment, but we have, as always, a prophetic topic. And today's topic is Thou Shalt Love. And this line comes from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the New Jerusalem Bible, chapter 22, verses 35 to 40. The statement reads as follows: Master, which is the greatest commandment of the law? Jesus said to him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second resembles it. You must love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets too. So what we're going to be talking about today really is about Church of Antioch, what it is, and in a town such as Santa Fe, where very heavily Roman Catholic, what we're going to be talking about is there are Catholic churches that are not Roman Catholic. And I think for some people that might be a little, shocking or something new to them. Because I know for years I didn't think there was anything other than Roman Catholic. You said Catholic, you said Roman Catholic. It was almost like, they went one hand in hand. So we're going to start talking about what the church is and what it is and how it differs itself from the Roman Catholic Church. But before we even do that, I want you to get to meet these two gentlemen because, we talk about walking a path, and a lot of people sometimes get stuck in the religion of their parents and get stuck in religions that don't work for them. And part of what we do here is to show you not only the alternatives, but to show you that people can walk the alternatives. So, Archbishop, do you want to tell us your story first?
But the background a little bit, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I was born and raised back east, Flushing, Queens, New York, close to the Bronx.
And that's an exaggerated little accent there, but that's okay.
But I was involved with the Episcopal Church all my life, in New York and out here when I moved out here. But as I grew into my own consciousness, so to speak, and started thinking for myself a little bit more, I studied metaphysics. I was with the Church of Religious Science for 14 years, and I learned a little bit about metaphysics and the power of consciousness and the power of the mind. And then I was drawn back to my roots in the sense that I attended a few Roman Catholic masses here in town, and with my metaphysical background, I really realized that there is a power involved in this rite, this celebration, this action. And I was attracted to the Mass. But of course, I luckily found the Church of Antioch, who allowed great freedom in consciousness and thinking and lack of rules and regulations and things like that. So I found the Church of Antioch, and I was able to apply my metaphysical concepts within the sacred Mass itself. And that's how I wound up here.
When you say found it, was there an existing church ongoing here when you arrived here?
Well, how that worked? No, there wasn't. How that worked is that I happened to run into a man in Santa Fe who I knew from the old metaphysical community, and I said to him, Dean, what are you doing these days? I haven't seen you in a long time. And he said, I've just been ordained into a metaphysical Catholic church, and those were buzzwords for me. In other words, the freedom to use contemporary metaphysics in ancient ritual. And so I just said, well, what's the name of it? And he said, the Church of Antioch. And at that time, the headquarters were in San Jose, California. And so being a Virgo and being skeptic, I got on an airplane and flew out there to make sure these guys were legit and all that stuff. And I found a very small but very legitimate organization trying to develop independent Catholic thinking and develop an independent Catholic church. And so I studied with them for 2.5 years. Oh, and I think it's important to note that on Halloween 1987, I was ordained into this particular church in Mountain View, California, by the presiding Archbishop at that time.
You and I have known each other for quite a while. We've done some radio shows back then. This is the first time I remember you talking about metaphysics. Mm-hmm. And my first reaction is to use the phrase metaphysical and Catholic in the same sentence is a contradiction in terms.
To you, maybe, not to me.
Obviously not. I mean, and maybe I want to let the bishop introduce himself, but I'd like to get back to that and talk about what that metaphysical integration looks like, because I think that when you talk about Santa Fe, this is the metaphysical headquarters of at least the Western world, and it'd be interesting to let the people know what that's all about.
Yeah.
But Bishop, how about your path?
Well, when I was about 8 or 10, I can't remember because it's been, back when dogs could talk, that's what the Native Americans would say about that far back in time. I was drawn also, as the Archbishop, to the Mass. I was born into a fairly traditional Roman Catholic family, and the Mass began to really captivate my imagination, so much so that when I was 17, I entered the Jesuit order of Roman Catholic priests, and I was with the Jesuits for 17 years. When I left the Jesuits, of course, I was thoroughly trained in Roman Catholicism, history, philosophy, theology, one of the best educations that the Roman Church could offer. But when I finally left, I continued this spiritual path, but in a different way. I eventually married a woman who gave me not only 3 wonderful sons, but she was a nurse, so we co-founded 2 hospice programs in San Francisco right at the beginning of the AIDS pandemic in 1979. And we did some pioneering work for 10 years together. And when we finally broke up, I went on this magical, mystical trip to the Soviet Union. And there had a real kind of conversion experience, and found myself here in the City of Holy Faith, and started my metaphysical training and my openness toward different types of spirituality, especially shamanism. Eventually was recognized and ordained as a Hawaiian kahuna here, and then gradually found my way to this man. I heard about him and went to his Mass, and I could see how he moved energy. And during my stint with shamanism, I was very much attuned to the movement of energies. And so the rest is history.
Let me back up for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Those people, I mean, I don't think there is one in town, but there is a very large Russian Orthodox Catholic movement. Is that what you, when you talk about being in Russia, is that what you got introduced to?
No, it's one of these things. If you follow the breadcrumbs, you will ultimately be led to whatever it is that you are supposed to get involved with. My sense is it wasn't so much about going to Russia as it was about meeting some people who eventually got me to this place. And when I got to this place, everything opened up in a far deeper way. I had been ordained for, well, now it's about 35 years in the Roman Church. And I had not been practicing my ministry, wearing these for over 25 years. And I thought I never would until we connected. And I felt this call once again become activated.
What was it that you walked away from, or why did you walk away from, all that time as being a Jesuit?
Well, it wasn't the priesthood. I loved the priesthood. I'll tell you exactly what happened. By then I was the director of campus ministry at the University of San Francisco and the University Ombudsman. And, that was essentially a vice presidential position, and I was on that track to continue that kind of administrative office. I made a retreat, and at the retreat, I was sitting in front of the tabernacle in this empty chapel, and I said, well, there's this part of me that the church really likes, part that likes to say Mass, hear confessions, counsel people, and they have no problem with that. But there's this part of me that wants to have a family and that wants to have a relationship, and they have a problem with that. And I heard this big voice, and I looked around the chapel. It was so big, and it looked empty to me, but here's what the voice said. Too bad for the church, because I create you, all of you, and I give you as my gift to the church, and if the church does not accept you, it does not accept me. And I just got up and I packed my bags and made an appointment with the provincial, because it was very clear to me that it wasn't the priesthood that was the problem, it was the discipline of celibacy and that kind of, well, from my perspective, the control issue that I was walking away from.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, and I've talked about this on the air quite a bit, but the Roman Catholic Church is full of control, and it just
most churches are, I think.
Yeah, and that is true. I'm not trying to single them out, but it's just they set the tone, and yeah.
I would like to jump on to
go for it.
My metaphysical experience, similar to his, and the idea of when do you get it? As I was telling you about, my background was with the Episcopal Church, but I was dating a local woman, and she was a Roman Catholic, and I started going to the cathedral only for 4 or 5 masses. But with my background in metaphysics, and we are in the city of Holy Faith and the city of woo-woo, if you want to call it that. And so anyway, I went to this Mass, and the Franciscans were still running the cathedral at that time. And I was way in the back, but I looked up at the altar there, and all of a sudden, the priest that was doing the Mass at that time, boom, his aura popped up. And it was beautiful. And to me, that was a sign that there's much more to this rite or this ritual than just a man standing behind that table or in front of that table, see? And so that's when I got it about the energy that he talks about. And I've always been with energy and understood energy and the laying on of hands with energy. And so that was one thing that got me back to, I really feel like I need to do this work of the celebration of the Mass.
Let's start talking about what this history, you're talking about a physical, so people are going to start to think that you guys just popped up about 6 years ago or something, which is not the case. But you have a name which goes all the way back to the beginning, Apostolic, Antioch. So, this is not something new. From what my question is, my understanding of those times and that period, if it was anybody who was, quote, metaphysical, it was Gnostics. Mm-hmm. Is that what the roots of the Apostolic Church is?
Well, my sense is, if you read some of the contemporary historical theologians, they'll talk about those early days. And I remember one of them saying, the winners are the ones who always write the history.
Yeah.
The Gnosticism, you can see the roots of Gnosticism or the connection of Gnosticism in things like the prologue of St. John. It's all about the light and the word, and that's all like a huge Gnostic hymn to the Christ. The apostolic part means that there is this belief, this doctrine in some parts of the Catholic tradition, about an unbroken line of transmission of energy through the laying on of hands, through the ordination or consecration of bishops, as successors to the apostles, as witnesses to the resurrection. So that
each apostle had their own lineage, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, there's only really one, which is the Christ energy. But it comes through each of these apostles as being missionaries to various parts of the world. And so within this overall Catholic tradition that includes the Orthodox and the Anglicans and Episcopalians, you have this tradition of the transmission of this lineage, or of this connection, or of this grace, this character, however you want to call it. And the belief is that it's an unbroken passage of energy. And so that's the apostolic part. We're connected to the apostles, to that mission of going out and bringing the good news to the world through that transmission of energy. The Antiochian part is that one of the earliest communities, in addition to Jerusalem, was Antioch. And Antioch was a very old, ancient center of spirituality. And Antioch is the one that is the place where the term Christian was first used. And the operative definition of what a Christian was is this sentence: see how they love one another. So we connect to that tradition, not only through this apostolic succession, but we connect to it in terms of our sense of openness. Antioch was a very cosmopolitan city, and so a lot of different spiritualities were connected through Antioch.
And that's why we have the topic we have, thou shalt love.
That's what it's all about.
Agreed. So let's back up on Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see Gnosticism as part of what you folks
tradition? Well,
tradition, part of your rituals, part of your teachings?
My sense is this: different people will have different takes on this. Now, we're a church that is non-creedal. So that means that we do not have a creed that everybody needs to align themselves with, as opposed to the Roman Church or the Orthodox churches. We feel that there is the movement of spirit, which is the teacher, that this is the mystical, if you want, metaphysical aspect of it, that there is a direct intimacy and connection between the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Christ, and those of us who are open to it. Some acknowledge that and some don't.
Let's explore it a little bit deeper.
Okay, sure.
For those people listening, watching, who have not experienced Roman Catholicism, what would be a easily identifiable Roman Catholicism creed?
Well, go on.
Well, I was going to say the Nicene Creed. We need to realize, of course, that for the first 300 years of Christianity, there was no creed. But they had to develop one because they had to define what they really believed. Because just like we're talking about independent Catholicism now, okay? So even the first 300 years, there was all kinds of men doing all kinds of different things, and the leadership was saying, wait a minute, there's all kinds of weird stuff going on there. We got to pull this together a little bit. So they came up with the Nicene Creed. It took them a long time to do that. But this is like a statement of our beliefs, and if you're with us, you need to understand and believe these things. So there's a lot of churches that use the Nicene Creed, of course, and there's a lot of churches that don't have any creed because they don't want to be tied down to a particular fixed agenda.
So is this where the other Orthodox independent Catholic movement started to break out? I mean, there's a Greek Orthodox, there's a Russian Orthodox, there's you folks. I mean, I don't know how many others there are, but there's quite a number of varieties of Catholicism that is not Roman.
Right.
Well, let me talk about that, and you can tag on if you need to. Independent Catholicism started a long time ago. I mean, first of all, there was only one church for the first 1,000 years. And it was the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. In 1054, That's when they had what they commonly called the split. And it was clearly defined then, Roman Catholic and Eastern Rite churches. That was the split. So there were the Orthodox, the Eastern Rite churches were independent Catholics from Rome. That's the whole thing. And then you have Henry VIII in 1545. You have Luther in 1575, or rough figures about that. So there was always people breaking away from the main line. Because
What caused that first split in 1054?
well, yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's a in the Nicene Creed, you have this statement that the Spirit flows in. If you go to Roman Catholic churches anywhere in the world, they'll say that the Spirit comes from the Father and the Son. It's called the Filioque doctrine. The Eastern churches did not believe that. And so that was the big split. It's hard for us to really think in the terms of 1,000 years ago. But this was not the church, and the experience of the integration of the church into the daily life of people was sacrosanct. I mean, it ran right down the middle of everything. Salvation meant, eternal damnation or being with God in heaven. Those kinds of essential doctrine are very scary to people. And so the allegiance of which creed would get you to heaven or keep you out of hell, the stakes were really big. I mean, bigger than the lottery, there were literally fights. I mean, there were wars set. People were killing each other wholesale. Villages would be wiped out. People would be tortured. And it seems strange to us, torture a person so that they could believe what you believe. It seems very strange.
We're still doing that?
Well, yeah. Well taken. But that was the main split. There were a lot of other things. Where power is, people like to have it as opposed to not have it. And it's a very tempting thing to want to exert power over people. And if they don't like the way you're thinking, it's a very short step from here to let's make them do that. And we either torture them. Excommunication, that's eternal damnation, but lopping off a limb or blinding someone or having them disemboweled, those are not nice things.
So let me back this up just for a second. Are you saying that the independent Catholic movement at that point said there's only one spirit and we're not going to go to this duality stuff? Or?
I think that there were a number of it. See, I think it's too easy to think that there was only choice A or choice B. Mm-hmm. There were many ways of looking at things, many different doctrine and dogma that would be looked at as acceptable for some, not acceptable for others. We don't have the sense of the divine right of kings anymore. At least most of us don't. But that was a hot issue, and that's why these kings were consecrated by bishops. They're the same kind of, or very similar ceremonies for the making of bishops or the ordination of priests. So the connection between the Roman Empire and then its decline and its allegiance with the Roman Church, which was the biggest political organization, became the Holy Roman Empire. Now you've got two things. You've got the power of God on your side, and you've got the Roman armies on your side. So a lot of this stuff is really in conjunction with the shift of consciousness in the West and in the East, Northern Hemisphere, right? We're still having troubles trying to incorporate the Southern Hemispheric peoples, which I think is the next step. So this split occurred really early. I remember reading John's letter. What we've seen, what we've touched with our own hands, the word of life, this is our message. And I remember reading it on retreat and saying, oh my God, this was the beginning of persecution. Right at the beginning, because it's a short step from we believe this to who doesn't believe this. And we got to get those guys.
You know, one of my favorite passages, and it's Gnostic, it comes at the end of the Gospel of Mary. And you were talking about the Gospel of John, and I forget the gentleman's name, but there's a thesis that's been floating around for a while that Mary was the actual author of the Gospel of John. But then there's also the Gnostic Gospel of Mary, and at they're missing a large segment in the middle. But it's really what it was supposed to be what Jesus, after he had arisen again, had related to Mary, because she was there, pulling watch, so to speak. And then she comes back and transfers this information to the apostles. And the very last thing that Jesus tells her to tell them is go out and spread the gospel and create no new laws. And I found that so enlightening, and yet what we're talking about is so contradictory to the whole path that the church followed.
Well, we were talking the other day, the three of us, and I mentioned Deepak Chopra's book, The Third Jesus.
The Third Jesus.
And it's a very interesting read. And he talks about the historic Jesus that we know nothing about, and the Jesus of theology that we know more than we need to know about. And he's talking about the third Jesus as being the master of enlightenment and awareness. The qualities that are primarily identified with Buddhism and Hinduism. They are about integrating into a larger frame of consciousness. Most of the religions that we're about, and the main interpretations of the Christian religion is about the worship of God, and that comes through, from the Hebrew tradition as well. It is very interesting to look at Jesus as a master of consciousness, and I think that that's where he and I and a number of people in our church will come together, because we see that as a very important aspect.
Well, last week's show was with Father Murphy.
Yes.
And we did the show on, basically it was on the Beatitudes. We touched a little bit on the Sermon on the Mount, but it was mostly about the Beatitudes. That is nothing but consciousness training, and my beef with Roman Catholicism, so to speak, is the fact that there's so much that goes on, and I want to, my favorite question when somebody tells me something is, can you show me where Jesus said that? Can you show me where Jesus taught that? And all the stuff that makes up the creed, makes up the dogma, has nothing to do with Jesus' teachings.
Yeah. I was having that same insight yesterday in my meditation as I was thinking about this, because it's a closed system. It's either from Scripture, which is essentially Protestantism, after it moved away from Roman Catholicism, or it's Scripture and tradition, or teaching authority that comes through the bishops and the Pope. The problem with that is it's closed. There's no way of validating or whether that's true other than the system itself. The system itself says this is the criteria.
This is the truth, and you can't argue with it.
Right.
So if you can't explore the truth and you can't argue with the truth, you got a closed system.
I don't want to make this session about criticizing other churches, especially the other mainstream Catholic traditions. They have a perfect right, and I support their right to believe what they believe, to teach what they teach, and to have whatever criteria they set up for membership. And I've been through that tradition, and there are many, many lovely, wonderful, beautiful aspects to that tradition. The problem that I have is that human beings can only understand so much. And one of the definitions that I like about God that St. Anselm said essentially is, you think of God and you define him, and God is always at least just a little bit bigger than your thoughts, right?
People listening to the show know me. I'm in recovery. I'm a recovering drug addict. I got my recovery in 12-step programs. my first sponsor, when you get to the second and the third step, which is the introduction of the spiritual components, coming to believe and turning our will and our life over, basically said to me, if you've got a God that you could understand, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Exactly what you were saying.
That's that phrase, if on the road you meet the Buddha, kill him.
Yeah,
Let
exactly.
Let me jump back to the independent Catholic movement a minute. We started out with an explanation of, you asked, what were the reasons why they split? One was, of course, this Filicue situation. But the other one was the infallibility of the Pope. And so there was a group that was saying we just can't accept that as belief, as dogma, see. And so the independent Catholic movement in general, which has been around from the beginning, there's always groups that think they understand it a little better, or they understand it differently, or they don't want to accept what they're receiving. And so there's people breaking away all the time. If you look at the newspapers today, they're all splitting within themselves now. You know, the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, they're all considering this split because you think different than I do, I can sit in church and think different than somebody sitting next to me, but I still love them. And they're welcome to my worship service. It's up to them whether they want to stay or not, but our doors are open.
I want to get to that in a second, but let me throw it out to both of you. Are we getting to a place where, for lack of a better term, people are attending whatever church they're attending because it's a cult of personality, that the lines are being blurred? I mean, I talked about this way back first time around with Father Murphy. You look at the Episcopal churches in town, and you got 3 of them, and each one of them has a completely different attitude, yet they're all coming from the same place in the same book. And the attitude is not a reflection of the book or the place. Mm-hmm. It's a reflection of the congregants and the minister. So, I mean, are the lines starting to blur? Are we starting to...
Well, I think there's that aspect, but you know what I really think? Is that Spirit wants to have communion with people. Yeah. And without a interlocutor or interpreter, Spirit is always available. This is the difference between the form side of spirituality and the spirit side of it. The form side can change. Years ago, when my son, who's like 30 now, he was asking me about, he said, when you die, Daddy, he was like 3 years old. He says, when you die, Daddy, will you come back and get new skin? Mm-hmm. So he was already starting to talk about reincarnation. I said, well, don't talk to too many kids in your class. They may freak a little bit. But, what happens is that as you grow, you put holes in your genes, in the knees of your genes. Your mama throws the genes out. She doesn't throw you out. We keep you. The
pants, in my house.
Yeah, the pants keep growing to meet your needs. Here's my sense. God is way beyond what we think we can control. And what we think we can control is a total illusion. And my sense is, when I look at the great spiritual leaders, they come in touch with the divinity within them. We have a system that has a tradition of energetic transmission. You can call it grace, character, you can call it the spirit, whatever. God doesn't mind whatever you call it. There is this thing. It's palpable. I've seen it in Buddhists. I've seen it in shamans. I've seen it in atheists. There is a presence there that's beyond definition. It is an enlivening presence. It is a joyful presence. The qualities are love, light, peace, joy. If you find those there, you find God. God is not missing from any part of what we experience.
Well, not to get too far off track here, but I mean, part of what you're talking about, I believe, comes down to this kind of, again, and it goes back to the roots with Judaism of this paternal kind of approach to God.
Yes.
So we take, on a psychic level, without even realizing it, if my father, our father, then what my father was like. Well, that's what this, we just
Yeah.
extend it a
Yeah.
little bit, but we don't,
Yeah.
like you're saying, we box it in and we make it small, and we don't allow for something to be beyond anything we can comprehend, and we make it, by making it small, we make ourselves even smaller, and we wind up in these petty things. But I don't want to go down this thing too far. So all these people listening and watching the show, I got to get used to this terms watching. I'm used to radio, listening. They're fascinated now. They've heard the word metaphysical and Catholic in the same sentence.
We pray.
They're going to show up. At the end of the show, we're going to give you some time to tell them where the service is and how to contact you. But let's just talk about, what does an independent Catholic, your independent Catholic service look like? Do you folks use the Bible? What you're talking metaphysical. Are we going to come in and read Mary Ann Williamson? What's happening?
Okay, well, look, we follow the general Catholic format of the Mass, the general Catholic format, but our words are different. The sacraments are just as valid, but our words are different. We emphasize the positive. The metaphysical side is that we don't really emphasize sin and you're going to go to hell. That may be a reality, I don't know. But we emphasize the fact that through our consciousness and through our prayers, we can be uplifted, we can be filled with love, and we can be healed. So the words of our Mass are different.
Let me ask you before you say that. Is that, because people who've been watching me, when I quote the Bible, I always use the King James Version.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, for no other reason, that was the first one I got introduced to. And I like it because it puts Jesus in red, everything in black, so I only read the red stuff. I don't read the black stuff. I don't need somebody else's commentary. But you asked me to use, what was it?
The Jerusalem Bible.
Yeah, the New Jerusalem Bible. Is that a reflection of the church and what you folks do? When you say you read from, but you have a different emphasis. Is that
First of all,
Bible?
that's my personal preference.
Okay.
But of a use of a Bible. But what do we use at church? We use the same lectionary that the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, and the Roman Catholics use. The readings for the Mass are the same readings for the Mass.
Okay.
But our sermon topics and other parts of extra stuff that we put into the Mass are more open, more free, and we get great participation from our congregation to do readings and things like this. So we're not trying to imitate the Roman Church or the Roman Mass. But there is a certain lineup there that is very sacred and very mystical, and we follow that.
Okay. Go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah. I like to do these analogies because, they help me, and hopefully they'll help other people. I tell people when they come to our congregation, these scriptures, these dogmas and doctrine, are analogous, loosely, to when a family gets together for a family reunion. When a family gets together and they haven't seen each other for, say, at least a year or maybe a number of years, they get together and the first thing they do is they go up to Uncle Joe or Aunt Susie and they exchange what's been happening in the intervening time. But then the really good parts, the fun parts, happen when they get together and they all start talking about the family stories. And these stories have become so great that over the years, they've been embellished a little bit, and so there are some in the family who are great raconteurs, and they can dramatize and make it relevant for whatever is happening now, and they incorporate the children and they get the grandparents and all. That's kind of what all societies do. Scripture is a kind of a stylized way of looking at that. And you can see even within the what they call the synoptic gospels, the first three gospels, that it's the same basic outline, but the stories are tweaked just a little bit. And most people don't find any contradiction because they come to I'm sorry, but they come to church and they get kind of callous to it. They hear the introduction, oh, I know that story, click. And so I like to kind of mix it up and give little changes in the way I do the explanation or the homily to make it contemporary so that people have a sense that there are some things that are attributed to Jesus I feel that Jesus said. There's some things that are attributed to Jesus I don't think Jesus said, but the community took a story and applied it in a particular way. And in Ephesus, they may have had an emphasis on a particular problem or situation, and so they changed it a little bit. Now, that's what I like about our church, is because I can say that. And we tell people, this is just our interpretation. Now, other churches and other groups are fine. You know, the Boy Scouts of America are the Boy Scouts of America. They're not the Girl Scouts. So they tell things a little bit differently. There's things that are the same, but things that are a little bit different. The problems that happen in our church, and there are problems because we have individuals, right? So every once in a while, somebody will enter into a discussion, and then somebody will chime in and say, that's not right. And then when he was in charge, he'd come back on the email list and say, you know what? Everybody has a right to believe what they believe. Everybody gets to share. The problems happen when you tell somebody else what they should believe. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what differentiates our church. We have the same traditions, we have the same sacraments, we have the same sacred readings, but we interpret them, and we allow people to interpret them as they want. Mm-hmm. Even within that, what most people would experience as a very conservative tradition. So I believe in the sacraments. I believe in my own kind of way what it's about. I have my agreements and my disagreements perhaps with the dogma and the doctrine. But I see my place as presenting these gifts of sacrament to people. That's what really differentiates a Catholic tradition from a non-Catholic or Protestant tradition. Most Protestants do not have this sacramental priesthood, and we do. We share it a little bit differently than the Roman or Orthodox churches. We ordain women. We make them priests. We make them bishops.
How long has that been happening?
It's been happening almost since the beginning, and our church is our little denomination is celebrating its 50th year.
Right.
So, you know, the founding patriarch of our church was an intelligent, very cosmopolitan thinker. He has roots in the Methodist Church. He has roots in religious science as well, and you know, has a lot of connections to the esoteric. My sense is that my sense is that the divine working through him took all of these different things. It's like you can have a cake, right? Some people like white frosting and white flour. Other people like chocolate. Other people like chocolate with a little bit of peanut butter. Cake, if you will, is the tradition. But there are individual aspects that reflect unique aspects of the divine. So each of us, it's like, you know, your ministry is a beautiful ministry. And it's unique. And it doesn't have to be coming from the same roots as my ministry, or better, the forms of expression. But I know you're a brother. I know that you have a connection with the Christ energy. I know that you are open to other ways of seeing that divinity. I like that. And our church has that kind of general attitude. We're Christian, we're Catholic, but we're open to all kinds of spirituality. We have people who are practicing Buddhists. We have one seminarian who is a Tolku. He's studying for our priesthood, but he is a recognized reincarnation of a Lama in the Buddhist tradition. I like that. I like the fact that we can have that space.
One of the most common things, I think, to simplify things, because I do things simply, hopefully, the biggest question that we get asked at our churches, what's the difference between you guys and the Roman Catholic Church, okay? Now here's the big three. Because this is what they want to know right away. So I always pop it out right away. In other words, instead of floating around with fancy words, number one, we ordain women to the priesthood. Number two, our clergy, men or women, can be married. And number three, we ordain homosexual people. That's what they want to hear. They may not agree, but they know exactly what we're about, and let's just put it on the table.
I'd add a fourth, Richard,
Sure.
which is we are not, though we come from the Catholic tradition, we are not under the jurisdiction
Right.
of the Pope. So we have connections. As I say, Pope's always welcome to come to my Mass, because we're all one, I believe, but he may choose not to do that. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that, because everybody gets to choose how to live their life from my perspective.
Yeah, the biggest thing I want to know is, are we part of Rome or not? And no, we're not. We have a history going back to the Church at Rome, but we're not under those rules and regulations and those controls.
You've been talking a lot about energy. Do you folks do a hands-on healing as part of your service?
Not on Sunday mornings, but we have a Wednesday night prayer and healing service that we've had for 11 years. Yeah. And yes, we do the laying on of hands there as part of that service, and deep meditation. Mm-hmm. Deep meditation and the laying on of hands. And it, to me, that energy that we keep talking about is the Holy Spirit. That's the word that I would put on it. The Holy Spirit moves through everything.
Yeah. And, you know, that's within the tradition, letter of James. If any among you are sick, let him come and have the elders lay hands upon them. Now, what's also kind of interesting, in our church, now each of our churches are independent from each other, and a lot of our clergy do not necessarily have parishes. A lot do healing ministries of various kinds, or counseling. But what I really admire about this man, and what I've experienced in the almost 7 years that I've been connected with him in the church, is that he will be there at the Chapel of Loretto. We rent the chapel at the Inn of Loretto. It's a very magical place. And when we are there, I tell people, it's like we get in there and it becomes a Ferrari of prayer and spirituality. We turn that key and they just go, brrr, and you can feel it. You can feel that angelic energy there. People come in, especially when we're doing the Mass there, and they'll spontaneously burst into tears. I mean, you know, it's the energy is such that it breaks through a lot of defenses, a lot of layering, and goes right to the heart. I remember the first time I was there, and there was somebody in the congregation, and he comes down, he interrupts the Mass, and he comes down, and he goes over to this person, never seen this person, I'm sure, in his life, lays hands on this person and prays. Same thing happened this Sunday. He was celebrating the Mass. I was one of the co-celebrants. There's a woman priest that we have that we alternate. And I looked out into the congregation, and I saw this woman on the verge of tears. And I just felt that there was a need of some healing energy with regard to guilt. And, you know, I mean, I've been at this for a long time. I got a doctorate in psychology as well. So I looked out there, and this is why I asked you if I could say something at the end.
Words, yeah.
And I got up and I talked about how Halloween was about letting go of all of these masks that we have of being horrible and really giving sweetness to our children underneath. And I was looking at this woman, and I just shot her a bunch of energy of acceptance and love and forgiveness, and talked with her afterwards. You see, to me, the form of the Mass should not be the dominant thing. The expression and the meeting of God and people is the important thing. And so rather than, you know, I'll jump off the train rather than stay on the train and leave somebody in a heap back here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's the compassion, it's the healing. This is what Christ is about. I've come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. Not, I've come so that I can ignore someone who's in pain.
Really?
You know, that's for me.
We're going to be starting to run down on time, so let's start before we lose the time, you folks, either one of you, both of you, give out contact information, how they can come experience one of these wonderful services?
Well, first of all, our local church is 21 years old, but we've been meeting at Loretto Chapel for the last 16 years. This is what you got to remember. If you'd love to come, and our doors are open to all humanity, The doors open at 8:30. We start with 15 minutes of formal silent meditation at 8:45. And at 9 o'clock, the Mass starts, and it's generally over by 10. And so everyone's welcome to come to Loretto Chapel any Sunday morning. We're always there.
Got to throw this out, ask the question, where does everybody park?
Oh, yeah. Actually, the best is, I'm sure people know where the New Mexico land office is. It's right across the street from Garrett's Desert Inn. The New Mexico land office has its parking lot right next to it, and the gate's always open on Sundays. So you park in there.
Okay.
Or on the street if you get there early enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Sundays is more, you can catch more spots on the street, but in general, most of our people park in the land office parking.
So that's on Sundays, one service.
Oh, then
One service.
One service, yeah. And then we have a Wednesday night prayer and healing service at 6:30 every Wednesday evening at my home on Cordova Road, which is 111 West Cordova Road.
And is there a phone number, email address they want to contact you, talk to you first?
The phone number is 988-4244. That's the church office, 988-4244.
Email?
I always have trouble giving them out because they get them messed up, but R. Gundry, Rgundrey, R. Gundry at cybermesa.com.
Okay. How about contact information for you if they want to talk to you?
They can get me through
the
through
same.
that main number. The one thing that I want to say is we're always saying, you're always welcome, but don't feel guilty if you don't come.
Okay. I'm going to make a couple announcements, and I'll come back to you folks for a parting thought. Oh, do you want to show the book first?
Well, doesn't make any difference. This book just came out. I just got it from the publisher yesterday, as a matter of fact. And for those who might be interested, it's called A Strange Vocation, and it was put together by a Scottish bishop, independent Catholic bishop, Alistair Bate. And what this is, it's 8 individual stories of how independent Catholic bishops became independent Catholic bishops and their story, their life stuff and their church stuff and all that. I happen to be one of the 8. And I happen to have my picture on the front, so that's good. But it's put out by the Apocryphile, that's Phile, the Apocryphile Press out of Berkeley, California. And it's very inexpensive. It's only $16.95. But it's interesting. If you're interested in independent Catholic bishops and the crazy thinking that some of them have,
Yeah.
pick up this book.
Okay. Couple of quick announcements. First, anybody wants to contact me, or if you've missed the contact information for Bishop or Archbishop, all my contact information will appear in rolling credits at the end of the show. Also, besides being a minister, I'm also a state licensed counselor. I do what I call spiritual counseling. I believe what you guys were talking about, that the Spirit is what really heals. My catchphrase is, without a spiritual component, there is no healing. And I get a little deeper into it. It's traditional therapies ask us to solve the problem with the same instrument that's creating the problem, and in the meantime ignoring our most powerful component, our spirit. So if you think that what you've tried hasn't worked for you and you want to try something a little bit different, this spiritual orientation, call me. I work on a donation basis. I'd be happy to work with you. Next week, we'll have a return of Shubraji. She was here early on. I think it was like back in August, I think we had her, or might even have been July. She's back in town, and we're going to do a show on strictly about the Bhagavad Gita, which is going to be fascinating. She's an authority on it, and she's very eloquent about it. So tune in next week, and you'll hear that story. Time for a parting thought. You can have one collective or two separate, but make it quick.
Well, what I am experiencing in the moment is this. I entered into the priesthood, I'm sure that Richard did too, because we felt the presence, the loving presence of God. We want to offer that to people without having to change them in any way, unless we see that their spirit wants to be changed. And usually it's about loving themselves and letting go of a lot of judgment.
Exactly. I mean, you nailed it right on the head. Nobody has the power to change anybody. You know, and that's where, you know, I don't call myself a healer because that's a misnomer.
Absolutely.
I am a teacher.
Yeah.
I teach people how to reach inside themselves and find the spirit that's within and utilize the power of that spirit to transform. But it's not about somebody changing us.
Yeah.
That just so belittles each individual and their own personal divinity.
Their own divinity, absolutely.
I'd like to throw out some kudos, okay? I live here in the city of Holy Faith, and I've been here since a long time, 1967, but I really feel that the spiritual community, all of the religious groups, the Muslims, the Jews, the Roman Catholics, we all work together wonderfully. I really think that we have a good combined interfaith community that's doing a wonderful job in the city of Holy Faith. I just love them all.
I agree with that. So, we got about a minute and a half left. Let's touch on something we talked about. It was at the end here. You know, love your neighbor as yourself. Is that not our problem? If we're not loving ourselves, how do we love our neighbor?
Well, whenever I do Richard's Mass, he has that quote there, and I change it. And I change it to love thy neighbor and thyself. And it's my little seed thought. And every once in a while I get somebody to come up and say, well, why do you do that? And I'll say, because most people do not love themselves. And how can you love your neighbor as yourself if you don't love yourself?
Exactly.
So what you're going to do is you're going to do what most people do. Project your negative judgments out into the world. And this is the cause of all of our problems. We don't realize that the quote at the baptism of Jesus, "This is my beloved in whom I am well pleased," is said to each one of us.
Exactly. That's a whole other show for another time, but I think we're pretty much out of time. I thank you both for being here. It was wonderful. I hope everybody enjoyed it, who's going to be watching, as much as I just sat back here and enjoyed listening to you two. It was very entertaining, very enlightening, very informative. A combination. What can you want from TV?
Slam dunk.
Slam dunk. Until next week, blessings to you all. Know that you are divine. Just sit there for a moment, tap into that, let it guide you. It's not that foreign, it's not that alien. You know, and there is no ritual, there is no form that is right or wrong. Rumi once said, there's 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. It's your intention that drives it, it's not your form. So just want it, give it a moment, give it a shot, let it guide you, your life will be better for it. Until next week, love and light to all of you. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.